And the virtual tour continues. Where will we go? Kind of like Finding Waldo, except for we're looking for where is Hanok, at least in his own mind. Now, that's scary to begin with, but Hanok, where in Israel are we going today?
Well, by popular request,
Huh.
we're going to Masada.
Oh, favorite place except for one thing. It's a long walk and it's hot. It's in the desert. And you always take me there when it's really, really hot, it seems. But,
Well,
you know,
what's funny is, for those of our listeners who are looking, saying, Chanok's not, he's wearing a kippah, but not a hat. And he doesn't seem to be wearing a fleece. I'm just wearing this, this. So the question is why? It's because today in Modi'in, it is 86 degrees.
so you've had
Definitely.
global warming is happening in Modi'in.
Well, the term that I prefer to use is climate instability.
Ah,
You know, there are people who want to lose their minds over whether there's global warming or not. But in the nation of Texas, when they can have below freezing temperatures for days and then be 73 degrees,
yeah,
something's not good.
yeah. Well, climate instability, there's a new way of saying it's springtime. Just thinking.
Well, I'm not sure that we've had the last gasp of winter yet, but you know, it
Okay,
is what
so
it is.
let's go to let's get the whole setting here. Okay, we leave Jerusalem and we're starting to head down. We go by the what I call the camel lot, which is where the guy has the camel, which would of course be a camel lot, and it's at sea level. You see this big sign that says sea level, but the problem is we don't see a sea right there. And then we still have how many feet or meters do we have to go before we get down to the Dead Sea?
Okay. The Dead Sea, which is actually the Salt Sea,
Yeah.
translation from Hebrew, because that's Yam HaMelach, the Salt Sea. The Dead Sea would be Yam HaMavet,
Okay.
and nobody calls it that. But that is 428 meters multiplied by three, boys and girls. That's about 1,400 feet below sea level. But we're actually not going to talk about the Dead Sea today. We're not even going to be talking about what we're seeing as we're leaving Jerusalem. We're not going to talk about Qumran that we'll be passing. We're not going to be talking about the specifics of the Dead Sea. We're not going to be talking about Ein Gedi. We're going straight, as if it were an express, to Masada. Ooh. Now, we're also, one little caveat, we're not going to contrast Masada with another site elsewhere in Israel
Hmm.
that might be as relevant, if not more so, a place very special in the hearts of Mr. Michael Clayton and Mr. Hanoch Young. However, when we get there in a few weeks, we will contrast that with Masada. But today, it's all Masada.
Because actually, Hanok, and just to digress a little bit, all those things that we pass, they have their own significance, and we're going to come back to them in weeks to come. But in order to understand the story that you're going to tell of Masada, we would have had to go to the Galilee and talk about a very important site up there. But we're going to do things as most tourists do, and that's backwards.
That's right,
Oh,
backwards and not in any kind of sequence that would make any sense,
that's true.
not provide any chronological logic behind it.
So instead of doing the Connect to Israel tour, we're actually doing the standard tour that most people do, which doesn't make sense, which is why someone should do a Connect to Israel tour, because it actually connects you in a chronological manner, right? But I digress. So,
Ouch.
Masada, here we are, cable
Okay.
car, running
Okay.
up the side of the hill, whatever you want to do.
Okay. The first thing is, what is Masada, and why is it that people would go all the way into the desert? And let me just reiterate something. It is, you're absolutely right. It is always hot. It is always hot there in the desert. It could be January. It could be rainy and snowy in Jerusalem. Not too rainy because of flash floods, but I'll talk about that. Actually, you know what? It's next week. I just realized it's next week that we're going to the Dead Sea, Qumran, and Ein Gedi. So people don't have to wait that long.
Okay, good.
But not today. No, no, no. Masada. What's it all about? What's it all about? Okay, here we go. We're back 2,000 years ago. Rome conquers the land of Israel in 63 before the Common Era. That's minus 63. What people used to refer to as BC. I followed the academic convention before the Common Era, after the Common Era.
Oh, so you're not talking about before,
63.
you're not talking about before COVID.
No,
Okay.
that's another terminology.
Okay.
That's and and by the way, guess what? As a tax-paying American citizen who was to file and pay the IRS every single year, on May the 1st, I got a letter from the American government. This is last May 1st, stating that I qualified for the stimulus payment, 1,200 buckos. And I waited and waited and waited. And guess what, boys and girls? It turns out that those checks associated with that letter dated May the 1st, not May the 15th, but that May the 1st grouping, anything outside of the US was lost and returned. I have to file 2020 taxes, which isn't for at least another 6 months here, because we get an extension. And make a long story short, so that's my sad story that I'm throwing in. What's the connection to Masada? You'll have to tune in at a later update and find out. Okay, so the Romans are in control. The Romans find this guy by the name of Herod, Herod. People ask, wait a second, Herod the Great, was he Jewish or not Jewish? And the answer is, well, it depends upon whom you ask. Based on current Jewish understanding of who is a Jew, based on the way it was considered then, yeah. However, the thing to remember about Herod is culturally, he was a Roman. Herod ruled here from 37 before the Common Era to 4 before the Common Era, 33 years. Herod was a megalomaniac, a wackadoo, a psycho, but truly a great builder. In fact, when you're in Israel, you are constantly seeing things that Herod built. Masada is one of them. But just to give you a little background, Herodian, which is his palace outside of Jerusalem, the temple and Temple Mount, Herod, the aqueducts in Caesarea, Herod. Now, for a megalomaniac, sadly, to a certain degree, he won, because it's now 2,000 years later, and it's very hard to go anywhere in Israel and not see something connected to Herod.
Mm-hmm.
But I digress. So Masada was a summer palace that he built. Did he need it? No. I just mentioned moments ago, he had a palace outside of Jerusalem called Herodium. Masada was one of those, well, you know what? If there's a revolt and I've got to run somewhere and hide, this will be it. It's a massive structure on a plateau in the middle of the desert. Now, when I say a massive structure, it was built to hold an entire Roman garrison with enough provisions for over 3 years. Now, where did they
What
get
you're telling
water?
me is that Herod was definitely a prepper.
No, he was an ultra prepper.
Okay.
You know, it's funny. The next time I grant a group of Americans, God willing, it should be somewhere in my lifetime. It would be great. It would be great to to mention that. You know, I have particular ethnic jokes. No, that's a bad no. I have particular jokes that certain nationalities relate to. Like when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister of the UK, and I would mention that his hairstylist, you know, gave him a resemblance to President Trump. You know, things like that. But I digress. So let's get back to Masada. Herod had it stockpiled. The water. They created a series of aqueduct channels that every single drop of water that would happen in the winter. Now, understand, in the desert, we get very few inches of rain at all in the year. Every single drop came in these channels, which went around the mountain that Masada is on and fed into cisterns. Cisterns are large water storage areas. People say, well, how do you tell the difference between a cistern and a mikveh, a ritual bath? Well, very simply. The mikveh, that's the plural, of which Masada has several, have stairs, and they're small. The cisterns are huge. Both are covered on the inside with plaster because the limestone that it's made out of is porous. Water would seep through it. Now, in addition, when Herod was there entertaining guests, he sent his slaves, nothing like being a tyrant, huh? He sent his slaves up to Ein Gedi to bring jugs of water, which they had to, in the colloquial Yiddishism, schlep from all the way from Ein Gedi. And again, you know, either on donkeys or via slaves, all the way up the mountain. Now, there were no elevators. What did they do? There was a path carved out, and it's referred to as Shvil Hanachash, the snake path. That is the path. It has been upgraded considerably in the last 2,000 years that people walk up. Now, just a quick digression. You cannot walk up Masada in the summer months. It is unsafe and it is closed. A number of years ago, at the time of a B'nai Yosef Congress, I guided a tour of participants to Masada. It was over 104 degrees on the top. And very tragically, that day, an American college student died. She was on one of these, you know, sign up for the day type tours. No one knew who she was. She did not drink water. Now, when I mean drink, I'm not talking about a sip. every hour. I'm talking about every 15 minutes, you're stopping and seriously drinking. She fell behind. She passed out from heat exhaustion. She rolled off the side, fell onto a plateau about 30 feet below, and died of heat stroke. This young woman was about 21 years old. Very sad, very, very sad. So, one thing that a guide always has to do is remind people to drink. And when I tell people, and this is for there's possibly among our listeners, possibly a handful of people who will very sadly, for some reason, not be going on a Connect to Israel tour at some point. So they're going to be going on their own. They're not going to have me to nag them. So I'm telling you in advance, you get one of those huge 2-liter bottles of water. Don't worry about going to the potty. If you have a decent tour guide, he or she will know all the potty stops. You drink. You seriously drink. One of those little bottles of water ain't going to cut it. What's great is when I was doing the day tours for Tourist Israel, the young Europeans who were out drinking the night before in Tel Aviv. Now I'm talking about people who are like, age, 24 to 30. I mean, they're kids dropping like flies. I mean, seriously. Water is huge. So there was enough water at Masada, and there was enough food, as I said. Now people say, well, what kind of food? In those underground is very cool. I don't mean cool as in like, whoa, man, that's cool, but it served as refrigeration. Things like lentils, beans, grains, dates, dried fruit. There was an enormous amount of food. Okay. Now we go towards the story of Masada. Why is it such a big deal? And why do people from all over the world go? Well, first of all, we're told about Masada from Josephus Flavius. Yosef ben Mattatyahu, Joseph, the son of Mattathias, ha-Kohen. He was a Kohen. He was of the priestly class. If he were born in Brooklyn these days, his name would be Joey Cohen. But Josephus writes about this. The Great Revolt, Jerusalem, the temple, destroyed in the year 70. The Romans slaughtering Jews left and right. A small group of refugees makes its way all the way down to Masada. They overpower the handful of Roman guards that are left as a garrison, and they take over. 960 men, women, and children. That's all that there was. Rome eventually hears about it, and in the year 73, they send a general Flavius Silva. If you've seen the Masada miniseries played by Peter O'Toole, who brings the Roman troops there. Now I have to pause for a second. One of the things that Masada has done in the last number of years is they really highly encourage, you could put that in italics, bold, and in quotes, groups and individuals to see this brief little film before they go up the mountain. It's fairly tacky, and it's extremely tacky, and it uses scenes from this mini-series with, as I said, Peter O'Toole and Elazar Ben Yair, the leader of the rebels, those rowdy militant Jews who would wear shirts like Stars and Fists of today, the Kahanists of the time.
Yeah.
It's played by Peter Strauss. You would be amazed at how many people have said to me after seeing that, I had no idea that the Romans actually resembled people that we know today. And, that brings us back to the just say no to drugs. Okay. The other thing is, for those people who sadly are not going on a Connect to Israel tour, why, I can't figure out why. If you're on your own, or you go back to Israel after the Connect to Israel tour, go into the museum located right across from the entrance. It's worth it to go and spend a bit more time. The film, although tacky, is good because it gives you a brief visual of what happened. So there are 960 men, women, children. Rome comes. They surround the mountain with a stone wall, preventing anyone from getting out. Now, the one question that many Europeans have repeatedly asked me, I find this fascinating, Americans don't ask this, is why did Rome bother them? There were only 960 men, women, and children. You have to go back to the TV series, was it Deep Space Nine? Or was it Star Trek, whatever it is, 7 of 9, resisted the Borg, resistance is futile. By the way, here, her name is Sheva Shaltesha, 7 of 9. I just made that one up. Anyway, yeah, like who cares? So, Rome is going to stamp out all resistance. So, what do? Roman engineers on the western side of the mountain. Now, y'all are saying, oh, what's the western side? On the eastern side, it faces the Dead Sea. This is the other side. They build a huge mound of dirt, a siege ramp. Now, very few people go to the western side. When we go on our Connect to Israel tour, I will take you to the overlook to look down on it, and you will see the remnants of that dirt siege ramp of 2,000 years ago. That is, to me, way cool. Way cool. Even more cool than that is they built the siege ramp so they could have their siege machines going up the ramp, protecting their soldiers as they fired arrows, etc. Now, in 2012, when I was a young boy in the tour guides course, the professor that took us to Masada, and we spent 8.5 hours there, was a specialist in Roman Byzantine architecture. We walked down the western side, and there had been 2 days of massive windstorms. Now, I apologize to my friends like Mike Clayton who've ever lived in Oklahoma. When I say windstorms, it's all relative. But the sand and the dirt had shifted, and he stopped at a couple places and pointed to I have pictures of it, of broken rotted wood sticking out of the ground. That was part of the wooden siege ramp. Every once in a while, I'll post that up on Facebook. Amazing. Okay, so the Romans are doing this. Now, who's building this? The Romans brought Jewish slaves from Jerusalem to do this stuff. So what do the defenders do to stop the Romans? They begin rolling down stones, big stones, and you can see them still at the top of Masada.
Yeah.
So what do the Romans do to stop that? They tied Jewish slaves to the front of these siege machines, basically saying, y'all have to kill other Jews to do that. So they stop rolling the stones down. Now understand something. They had more than enough water. They had more than enough food. However, they had no way to stop the Romans from coming up. Now, nowhere in anyone's mind was the Jewish settling of Masada to be the seed of a future revolt. They literally just wanted to get away and live their lives. Now let's pause for a second. There's a debate among Israeli academics as to who exactly were the Jewish defenders of Masada. Were they quote unquote zealots? Were they quote unquote Sicarii? Were some of them Essenes? It's like, it's almost as if they expect to find a hidden VCR tape, which will show this, defenders of Masada, and this is who we are. Here I sit brokenhearted, came to defend, Masada, but had to depart. I mean, just there's a terrible need on the part of the liberal left to take away anything that could be considered part of the glory or national pride. And in that case, we in Israel mirror many of the things going on in the United States. It's different, but similar. Keep that in the back of your mind. So Rome gets its troops right up to the gates. And in the Masada miniseries, they show that they fired flaming arrows to set the wooden gate on fire. The wind blows and starts consuming the Roman tower. Then, almost as if it was a divine omen, the wind shifts and begins burning the entrance to it. Nightfall comes. The Romans don't have night vision glasses. They're not part of the US Navy SEALs. They go back down to their camp and they're very pleased with themselves because they know the next morning they're going to come up and they'll get to rape and pillage and take slaves and, do all the things that Roman legionnaires did. The leader of the Jewish community of Masada, Elazar ben Yair, Elazar the son of Yair, calls a meeting together in the Beit Knesset, in the synagogue. Masada originally did not have a synagogue. Herod didn't need a synagogue. And by the way, speaking of Herod, Herod had two, that's right, boys and girls, two palaces in Masada. There was the one off on the side, and then there's the famous three-tiered one hanging off the northern end. People say, well, the guy was barely there. What did he need a three-tiered palace? Why did he build it? Because he could. That's why. Have slaves, will travel. Elazar. Josephus tells us the story. Now, Josephus was not at Masada. Josephus had been a Jewish commander captured in the Galilee. Many of us in Israel, including yours truly, view him as a traitor. Americans, y'all should be thinking Benedict Arnold. However, he writes these stories of what happened. Josephus tells us that Elazar gathers the people, the men of the community, and tells them very eloquently that they have no hope of winning. In the next morning, they will all be defeated. And the only hope of salvaging any of the honor was to take their own lives. Rather than seeing their children impressed into slavery, their wives and daughters raped, to take their own lives. Understand something very clearly. Suicide, as a general rule, I don't share halachic rulings on Jewish law, for the very simple that I'm a licensed tour guide, not a rabbi. But as a general rule, suicide is absolutely forbidden within Judaism. What they chose to do, and how did they do this? They took little rocks, little chits, if you will, and they wrote their names on it. And we, to this day, you can see some of those. Mm-hmm. They still exist. And they went around taking lots of who would kill the other. After these men went home and took their lives of their wife and children. Now, I just have to stop for a second. Dealing with death is incredibly difficult. Could you imagine holding the people that you love more than anything else in this world and taking a knife or a sword and taking their life? The men were then, and it came down to the final grouping, and the last one fell on his own sword. Now, what they did was they did not destroy the food and water. They wanted to make it very clear to the Romans that they didn't run out of, supplies, that they chose to steal victory from the very Romans that were, that came bursting in after sunrise. It is an incredibly emotional story, and it's incredibly impactful. There are some units, particularly our armored corps, that actually swear in on the top of Masada, repeating the slogan, Masada will not fall again. Now, there's one thing I've got to, for all of you who'll be going on our Connect to Israel tours in the next number of years, you'll hear me repeat this. But we, within the Jewish side of the family, when there is a part of a Torah scroll, for the sake of argument, or a holy book that has Hashem's name in it, God's name, we don't throw it away when it's, torn or damaged. What we do is we bury it. In the ancient world, what they did was they put it in what's called a geniza, a storeroom. Think of it as like sticking it in your attic. So next to the synagogue in Masada, the Beit Knesset, there's a storeroom. Now, when they came to explore Masada, and they found that, this is in modern times, the first scrap that they found was from the prophet Ezekiel, who spoke of the dry bones being stitched together and becoming flesh. That, in a nutshell, very briefly, epitomizes the symbolism of Masada to us. Again, as I mentioned several times, I've had the opportunity in the last, BC, before COVID, to guide a lot of Europeans. People from the European Union are really not used to Jews not listening to them. They spend a lot of time, slaughtering 6 million Jews and replaced us with about 60 million Muslims. Not sure how that's working out for them, but, in any case, so they can't get beyond this concept of Jewish self-defense. Here in Israel, and this has to do with our foreign policy, and this is why, America's discussions with Iran are not just an academic exercise for us. We take that very, very seriously. Masada is impactful. Many people find it to be the most impactful site for them in all of Israel. And all that means is they haven't come with Mike and I to a particular location to be named in the next couple of weeks in northern Israel, which is far more significant, not taking anything away from what happened at Masada, but multiply that by a factor of several hundred, if not several thousand%.
Because the story of
Little teeth
Masada,
that I am.
yeah, the story of Masada has so many questions that are unanswered until you go to the possibly the root, and where Josephus could have taken a story that happened somewhere else and overlaid it into Masada in many ways. Just give you a little bit of a teaser for weeks to come. Well,
Wow. Michael Clayton, you are such a tease.
we've gone a little long here. Real quickly, without getting into politics or anything, there's stories out of Israel mandating vaccines. In one word, can you tell me, is that true or false?
Nope. False.
Okay.
Fake news.
Fake news. Okay.
Yep.
Again, people need to be, you need to be cautious of where you're getting the news from. There's so much sensationalism. So many people are driving things, and you know, when it's kind of fitting into a preconceived theology, especially an end time theology, wow, that fits. Well, it may not be true, but it fits your puzzle, not the puzzle that's actually being brought forth here. So,
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. Well, boys and girls, thank you so much for listening. Keep hydrating. It's very hot here at Masada.
yeah.
And do you know what? Next week, we're heading back south from Jerusalem again. We're going to the Dead Sea, Camelot, Qumran, and Ein Gedi.
Wow.
So pack a lunch and a lot of water.
Should be a fun time. See you next week.
Take care, Mike.